Hello everyone, Evelyn here from Signature Recruitment. I'm the co-founder of Signature and the director of the London office. And here with me is Rachel, who is head of projects and delivery, who will share her recruitment experience and CV tips on this webinar. First of all, a really big welcome to everyone who is joining us for this webinar on how to edge the competition and how to stand out from the crowd with your CV. Secondly, I wanted to say a big thank you to everyone who has been sending in their questions prior to this webinar. We're hoping to answer as many of them in the course of this webinar, and there'll be like Q&A sessions available as well. Having worked in recruitment in the last recession in 2008 and 9, I really appreciate and understand how difficult and how challenging the market is at the moment. Literally anybody who is looking for work, may it be a recent grad, somebody who's made redundant, has been made redundant recently, or just somebody looking, for a new role. Right now, it's a tough market out there. And you probably would have seen in the news over the last few weeks in regards to, loads of candidates applying for similar roles. So it's, quite a client market, and also really in order to actually get an interview for a role that you apply for, having a really relevant CV that stands out will basically help you in the first, will be the first step in you hopefully securing, your dream job. So without further ado, I wanted to hand you over to Rachel. She has been with Signature for over 5 years, and she has been helping hundreds and hundreds of candidates in regards to CV tips, interview advice, and has helped them to secure roles that they were interviewing for. In regards to the format, Rachel will share her expertise for about 20 minutes or so. So towards the end of that, there'll be like a 10-minute Q&A session, and I think sometimes the best tips come out of that, because it's like candidates giving us real life examples of what they would like to know about the CV that I'm sure would be of interest, to everybody on this webinar. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Rachel.
Thanks, Evelyn. And hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I did just want to mention really quickly before I dive in that a full recording of audio and these slides that I'm about to run through will be sent through to you once we close the webinar. So I hope that helps you kind of sit back and relax and take the information in. Evelyn mentioned there in the intro just how important it is right now to have a really relevant, great CV in the current climate. And what I would say is that your CV is one element of the recruitment process that you have full control over right now. So I did just want to speak really briefly about the elements of the recruitment process that you do have control over. As we've mentioned, your CV, the document that represents you. So we will be talking quite a lot about that document through this live chat. You also have full control over your online presence. So I thought it worth noting that if you need to do any updates to have a complete profile on maybe a professional networking site, most popular LinkedIn, then that's worth looking into alongside your CV. And also any profiles that you have online that are more casual for your friends, set those to private. I think you'd be quite surprised how many people will Google you, especially before meeting in an interview setting. You'll have full control over how you represent yourself, certainly through an interview and throughout the entire recruitment process. Think about how you communicate and interact with these potential hirers, obviously professional written communication, and there are some really nice touches such as following up with an email after your interview to thank the person for their time, just a really nice touch that I also thought worth mentioning. Without further ado, let's focus on the CV as we had promised. So your CV. First thing that I wanted to run through here, first tip, a piece of advice would be to forget the rules. You may have spoken with other people who provided you CV advice as well. And one thing that I hear quite commonly is that they were told to limit their CV to a page or perhaps 2 pages. And I certainly have the point of view that if there is information that you can include on your CV that may take you over a page or may take you over 2 pages, but it will be that information that secures you the next stage of the process and certainly secures you an interview, then we should get that information on your CV. It's the purpose of your document. So I really wanted to get across that we should forget the rules, especially rules in regards to 1-page or 2-page CV documents. Let's make sure we can get that interview call. Second piece of advice is in regards to tailoring your CV. It is a really golden rule that we should tailor our CV every time we are applying for a role. Tailor your document towards the position you are applying for. And start right at the top of your CV. Many of you will have a profile on your document that talks about yourself and perhaps your skills. And what I would say is look at that profile and see if you can tailor it towards the job you are applying for. So certainly talk about yourself and your skills, but also your interest in the position and the reason why you might want to work for that organization or company. It is the first thing that a hirer will read on your CV. So if you are or referring back to the job and the organization in that profile, you started off on the best foot possible. Next piece of advice in regards to your CV is to give context. I know that you will certainly list your duties underneath your previous roles to explain what you carried out in that position. So you might have your role, and you might have diary management or inbox management as the duties you carried out in that position. And what I would say is it's quite important to give context to those duties. For an example, on my CV, I might put underneath my current role, host live webinars. And to give context to that duty, I could certainly change that bullet point up to say, organize, promote and host live webinars using the company CRM, Microsoft Office for emails, and also the Zoom platform. And from giving that context, the hirer can now see a breadth of skills. So they can not only see that I host live webinars, they can see some marketing skills and certainly systems ability in the different systems that I'm used to using. So I would say that look at your duties underneath your roles, give context and really convey the breadth of skills that you have on your CV. Can I just pass back to Evelyn and make sure, no, we're not too far in, but just to make sure that if there are any questions that have come up, we can just cover those really briefly before we carry on.
Absolutely. So yeah, we had just a couple of emails coming in from candidates asking questions. So you're very welcome to do that. But also, guys, feel free, you know, at the bottom, there's a Q&A box. So if there's a particular question you would like Rachel to answer in the course of this webinar, just put it in there. So one of the questions that has come in is, my company is making redundancies and I need to apply for internal roles. What would your advice be?
Okay, now I have had this question recently, obviously with the current times that we are within, and what I would say is that if you're looking at internal roles to apply for, you do need to treat that as you would applying for a role with a company that you have never worked with. So you're making sure that the role is relevant to your skill set and really tailoring any application you put forward. I would say in those circumstances it might be likely that you're going to interview internally with a manager that might know you or might know the work that you have carried out in recent times. And I would say that you do again need to approach that as if you do not know that individual and they do not know you. So prepare in the same way that you would for an interview that is for a completely new position with a completely new company, and don't kind of rest on any laurels there or be too casual. Show your seriousness in wanting to stay within that organization and secure that position.
Okay, great, Rachel. The other question that was emailed in was, I would like to know how important a LinkedIn link and a LinkedIn picture is, And please, how important the Zoom call background is. What would you say to that?
Okay, I will take LinkedIn first. As we've mentioned in one of my slides just now, I think it's a perfect time to look at your LinkedIn profile, and a picture would certainly complete that profile. I would say if you are going to go with a profile picture on your LinkedIn, then make sure that that picture is professional. I would go with just a headshot with a smile, and don't try and crop a picture that you already have. So don't try and crop a picture of you that is maybe the wider images you out with your friends. That is definitely really a common mistake. So don't go with one of those. I would say a link, you know, like I say, it's quite common for people to Google individuals before meeting with them, and they would come across your LinkedIn details through doing that exercise also. With a Zoom background, I would think it is quite a lot of effort to make you know, a personalized background. I would say you don't really need to go to that length. I would certainly say it's quite expected that people are working from home at the moment. So if that is your concern, I don't think that would worry a hirer at all. If you do have maybe a blank wall like I have behind me right now, that would help in limiting any distractions for the interviewer when they're speaking with you. So that might be an easier route.
Okay. And Rachel, we're getting some questions in on the Q&A box at the bottom as well. So I think, do we have time for maybe at least one more? Somebody mentioned, and this actually we had as a question emailed in as well, so obviously quite topical. It has been 9 months since my last role. How do I explain my gap? I mean, this, you know, the gap could be for various reasons, couldn't it? It could be health issues, or it could be just out of work. But how would you normally put an explanation in, or what would you normally do? Do you know what I mean? If there's a gap in a CV.
Well, we will talk quite a lot about gaps coming up in my next slides, but I would certainly, want to put forward an answer to that, because I know a lot of people might have experienced a gap this year in their employment.
Okay.
I would say there's a lot of different circumstances. Some people have taken up some really temporary ad hoc work. Maybe it was, you know, in a supermarket or something that even might be quite irrelevant to their background. So I would say that you might not even feel like that's relevant to include on your CV, but if that's the case, then you could maybe just include one line of have completed temporary work and kind of the dates that you have done that. If you spent some time where you've been out of work this year doing some L&D, then I think that's important, and that you could include that in your education section, or, you know, if you have a training section under your CV, that might be quite important to pop that in there. I would say obviously it is quite common, and people wouldn't kind of look at that CV and think that was out of the ordinary, but there are elements that you could put in there to say, well, I might have been out of work, but I was busy with this or X, Y, and Z activity.
Yeah, okay. And also, Rachel, sorry, one other question, and just to make sure we answer as many of them as possible. Somebody asked, you know, to show a sample CV, and I'm just trying to think, is this something that we could email this to this individual? Do we still have sample CVs, just so, you know, we could show them a little bit of the layout, or because I think
we certainly can. Yeah. We certainly have some sample CVs that might be of use. There is also going to be a blog on our website in regards to CVs, and within that blog will be a CV template that will be really useful, that you can use as a blank canvas and literally then input your own information. So there's a number of tools that we have there that we can certainly email across.
Yeah, great, lovely. So I think this person who asked these questions, you're very welcome to maybe email Rachel directly. Her email address is rachel@signature.recruitment.co.uk, and they can get back to you as well. I think, Rachel, we still have questions coming in, but I'll let you continue. And also, guys, like, you're very welcome to continue adding them, like I said, to the bottom of the Q&A box, and we will answer some more of them towards the end of the webinar.
Perfect. So the slide that's still on the screen at the moment, I would say that those 3 are the first priorities that you should address if you're coming to your CV to do some work on that document. I would say that, you know, in my time in recruitment, I've seen thousands and thousands of CVs, sometimes hundreds at a time, if you're screening for a particular position. So did just want to impart some of my experience over to you guys from having looked at so many. So in my experience, I think that it is also really, really important to include accurate dates on your CV. I see a lot of CVs that will simply state the years that you worked in that company. And we have to remember that we are up against a high volume of applications at the moment. So without you having the intention to do so, it might be coming across on your CV that you've had an employment gap. That might not necessarily be the case. So I think that if you could include months and dates next to your roles, it should show a well-read kind of timeline on your CV. And as we touched upon just now in the question section, I wanted to talk a little bit about covering gaps in your timeline. If you can cover the gaps in your timeline and it's quite apparent from your CV what you were doing next and which role followed after and which activity followed after each role, then the hirer won't have any questions or anything that they think, well, I'd have to pick that up with that person in conversation. Because remember, the CV that they look at next might be quite consistent timeline-wise, and if they didn't have any questions for that person, that might be the individual that gets a call for an interview, which is what we don't want. We want to edge the competition. So if you do have any gaps within your timeline, then it is better to cover it within your CV, answer that question from the start, and ensure that we can just move forward with the next stage of interview. So some kind of valid employment gaps might be you've had a period of independent travel. It is perfectly okay to include just one line, not adding too much to the length of your document. So one line that states traveling and the dates that you were abroad during that time. Maybe you had a period of maternity leave. Again, another quite common reason for employment gap. So you could have maternity leave and the dates that you were absent from your employment, and also studying. You are studying full time, then you're not necessarily working during that period too. So you could include studying and then the dates of your course on there. So there's some examples of how to cover gaps in your employment timeline. Next, I wanted to talk about prioritising for the hirer. We've mentioned quite a lot about the volume of applications that comes through for each vacancy at the moment. And I think that it is human nature for any hirer looking at a high volume of applicants, especially if they're under time constraints, to skim read. And I think that there is a way you can prioritise on your CV to ensure that your key skills or transferable skills that are relevant to that role would still be picked up upon, even if the individual was skim reading your CV. So some tips for that is within that tailored profile we've mentioned, that's the first thing they're going to read, touch upon, a skim read, to make sure your transferable key skills are in there. You might have a key skills section. Make sure that that only includes what's relevant for the role you are applying for. And underneath each of your previous roles, if you bullet point each of your duties, it helps to keep your CV concise, but then you're also able to prioritize those bullet points. So the duties that are most relevant to your role, then make those at the top of the list of the bullet points, and then your bullet points read most relevant down to the least relevant in order of priority. And you're making that hirer's life really easy and prompting them to just make the call to you for interview, which is what we want. Evelyn mentioned that obviously we had quite a lot of questions come through, and I'm sure we will within the Q&A as well, but I did promise I would answer as many as I possibly could. So some of the questions that we've had come through, I just want to address on our next slide. One of the questions that I have received is, should I put reference details or contact information for my referees on the CV? I would say the short answer is that it's not relevant to include these details. It is certainly going to be part of the process that any hirer is going to ask your permission to contact your referees when they take the contact information from you. So it's not needed on your CV, and also it might take up valuable space for that information we've talked about that might secure you an interview. So I'd say leave that those details off and save the space for something that will get you through to the next round of the process. Next question is, what would my advice be on including voluntary work on my CV? So there could be a couple of different circumstances. So if you have voluntary work that is directly relevant to the role you are applying for, that voluntary work should go within your employment timeline, the same way that you would put an paid for role. So put your organisation, job title and the duties you carried out on a voluntary basis. If the voluntary work is not relevant to the role you are applying for, leave it up to your kind of personal judgment as to whether you maybe want to just leave it off your CV, or perhaps put it in a separate section, so under voluntary work, and have it separate to your employment history. That would be my advice there. Next question, should I send my CV if I feel I can do the job, but I don't meet every requirement on the list? I do actually have this question quite a lot from candidates on the job market. So there is a ratio that you can use as a rule of thumb for this. And I would say if you meet 70% of the requirements on the list, it is worth sending your CV over. A requirement list, more often than not, is a wish list. If the hirer could have absolutely everything in one individual, what would they have? So it is a full wish list. And I would say that when you're through to interview, there are other considerations, whether you be the right fit for the team, if your values align with the company's values, along with you having the correct skill set to carry out the job role. So if you meet 70% of those requirements, certainly put your CV forward. Don't rule yourself out of the opportunity, and see what comes back from it. Next question is, what format should I send my CV in? Straight answer for this one is use a Microsoft Word document. Candidates often tell me that I don't want to, send it in a Word. I'd rather a PDF in case any of the details are changed. I would say that, hirer is not going to go into your CV or change any details. What you would have the benefit of in sending a Word document is that every company uses a CRM system. And if they upload your Word document into the CRM, you're more likely that all your information is going to get pulled through to the record. So most valuable is obviously your contact details for them to contact you about that interview. But also, if you are really open to having your CV on file for future vacancies that come up with the company, then that could be really valuable later on to have a full kind of document upload and profile on their CRM. Last question for this section is, should I include my age or nationality on my CV? This is really personal preference. The only relevant example I could think of in response to this question would be that it would be relevant to include your nationality if it is for the job you are applying for. So for example, if you are French and you are applying for a role that requires a French speaking candidate, then that is obviously directly relevant to the role you are applying for. So include your nationality on there. Aside from that, I didn't really think of any examples, and I would say that those pieces of information, along with things like marital status, gender, family status, are not requirements on a CV. So leave it up to your personal discretion. Before we move on from questions, Evelyn, I know that there were some things that came through. Can I help with answering any of the questions from the Q&A?
Yeah. So questions are definitely coming in. So one of the questions, and I think there was a CV question in regards to the format of the CV just now, but there's also a question, do you think the design of the CV will help me stand out?
Okay. I've talked about this so much before with a lot of candidates I've worked with. If you are a designer, it's going to be quite useful to demonstrate some of your skills on your CV documents. I work with people who use Adobe quite a lot, so that can be demonstrated on a CV. I'd say aside from that, it is not really design or a graphic or a font or a color that is going to secure you an interview. It is the quality of your content. So if you're going to put work into your CV and spend time and effort doing that, focus on the content, demonstrating your skills in what you have written, showing attention to detail by proofreading correctly. It is those elements that will prompt a call to you as opposed to a fancy graphic.
Okay, thank you. I've also had a question in, hi Rachel, I've been working within the same role continuously for more than 10 years, but I've now been made redundant. How does this affect the quality of my CV? So yeah, over to you. I mean, I would think not at all, providing, do you know what I mean, the what's within this 10 years, but yeah, I'll let you go into detail.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I'm not sure what your role has been for that time, but you have something really quite valuable there to demonstrate on your CV, which is longevity and commitment within a position, which is usually a hirer's thought when they look at a long-term role like that. I would say that if it's the company that you have been within a long time, you maybe want to demonstrate if you started off in a certain role and moved into different positions, because it would show a breadth of skills and adaptability to go to different teams. That might be quite useful to put on there. Otherwise, I would say that you're not really at any disadvantage at all. Follow the guidance for our CV tips to make sure you have a full comprehensive document there, and I wish you all the best.
Great, thanks Rach. Another question is, I have worked in a supermarket, not relevant to my normal role, since I was put on furlough earlier this year. Should I include this in my CV?
Mm-hmm. I know a lot of people have done the same thing through the course of this year. Again, I'm not sure of the full background of the CV. If I was speaking with a graduate, I would say definitely put it on there, because obviously, you know, you've been in a supermarket, but customer service skills, communication skills, working at pace, those are all really valuable transferable skills. So you want to put that role on your CV and add to your experience. If you might be like myself, or I'm sure a lot of people on the webinar are have a more mature experience, or experience that they've honed on their CV across a number of years, then you might not want to include that. You might think it might dilute your experience a little bit on your CV. Again, I refer back to the comments we've made on employment gaps, and you could explain in just one line temporary work and the work that you carried out. You can certainly explain that a little bit later in the process, especially if they want to kind of reference that role. That might be part of a compliance process. Then of course, you've helped them in including the details on your CV, and they can always ask about the position in an interview for you to explain a little bit more.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Rachel. We probably have enough time for one more question, because we're nearly at 30 minutes, and obviously I'm quite mindful that people, have other things to do as well. But somebody emailed in saying, I don't know if I actually know the answer to that, Rachel, is like, do you know anybody that could check CVs? So I think I'm aware that there are organizations out there that do check that, but would the person who asked the question, would you mind emailing Rachel so we have your contact details and we actually can do some research for you, and then maybe we could recommend a couple of companies for you to approach, because there's definitely professional services companies that would do that. I think they might charge a small fee, but yeah, definitely happy to help, but I think we would have to do some research into that. So if you are happy to email Rachel at rachel@signaturerecruitment.co.uk, she can get back to you with the answer to that question. I think that's probably it, guys. I think that's all we have time for. Anything else from yourself, Rachel?
No, there's some signature resources on the screen at the moment. We have obviously our website with some useful resources on there. We have a YouTube channel for some videos giving certainly some application tips and interview tips. So I've included those on there. Remember that the slides will be sent across to you at the end of the webinar. And yeah, just thank you for having us.
Oh, thank you, Rachel. Also, I just wanted to say thank you so much, everyone who joined us this afternoon. I know it's a tough market out there, but I hope you found this webinar useful, and there have been maybe 2 or 3 tips that you could apply immediately to your CV. And yeah, I just really wish everyone the best of luck when they apply for the role, and obviously every success in securing their next job. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.